Okay, so there goes the recording. Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to this collective health conversation. My name is Laura Halpin and I work as a kind of a disgruntled nutritionist in the San Francisco Bay Area. I live in Walnut Creek and I am on the stolen land of the Bay Miwoks. And for those of you who haven't participated in a collective health conversation before, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what these are like. As I journeyed through my work as a nutritionist and someone who supported people around their physical and emotional health through mostly the angle of food, I became increasingly like, okay, this is such a small piece of the puzzle, but it's so like our culture to hyper focus on the things that we can fix, perfect, and also this idea that that our bodies are a problem to be solved. And what I found more often than anything was that it wasn't in eating better or, you know, trying this or that. Most of women's health issues really stemmed from a belief that they needed, if something wasn't right, they needed to work harder, be harder on themselves, hyper focus on certain variables, and often at the expense of like much more global issues like, okay, so I'm in a toxic marital relationship and I'm talking about broccoli sprouts. And so anyway, I became really interested in like, what are the bigger questions and how is our health or lack of health, or a lack of well-being expressing itself within systems, and that can be very detrimental. And so I wanted to keep like backing up and taking a more expansive view that included issues like racism and poverty and ableism and all of those very discriminatory lenses. And so anyway, that's kind of how these collective health conversations got started. So welcome to this conversation. And without further ado, I want to welcome our guest, April McMurtry, into this conversation.
Thank you, Laura.
So glad to have you. So April, so many of you on the call know April more than you know me. So thank you for just giving this conversation a whirl. And I said to April this morning that clearly her people want to hear more from her. And so I'm really excited just to have you here to share what you have to share. And we're talking about the moon today. And so I think before we get started, what I'm really interested in is if you would be willing to share in the chat box, when you think of the moon, what comes to mind? What are words or qualities? What are your intuitive associations with the moon? And April, can you see the chat?
I can, yeah, I have it up.
Okay. And I'm going to make you a co-host. There you go. So I see wisdom, reflection, support, cycles, starting again, gentle, ever-changing, feminine wisdom, divinity, healing, quiet excitement, and cycles. Cycles, systems, full moon, new moon, setting intentions, lunacy, tide, women, intuition, night, shadow work. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you for bringing yourselves into this conversation in that way. Before we get started, I thought that we would do a quick grounding meditation, if you don't mind. I feel like, especially because we're not in the same room and because we're so sensitive to astronauts, thanks Lisa, since we're so sensitive to the energy around us and there's a lot of fear and chaos and confusion in our environments right now, I invite you just to get comfortable. Take a deep breath in and out. And I really invite you to breathe at your own pace. We all have different lung capacities right now. And I invite you to say hello to your body. Just recognize that you are in a body, this miraculous vessel that is carrying you through this lifetime. And you might want to help yourself come into your body and out of your head just by maybe touching your arms with opposite hands. Maybe putting a palm on your chest or your belly. Maybe on your thighs. Feel your bum in the seat that's supporting you. And again, take a deep breath in and out. And another deep breath in and out. And on the next inhalation, I just invite you to notice that when your lungs are filling with oxygen, your body actually becomes more buoyant. So feel the levity that comes when your body is oxygenated. And then on the exhale, feel the density, the growing density as oxygen leaves your lungs. And again, notice the levity and the buoyancy that comes from the inspiration. And then on the exhale, just release yourself into your body's weight. Release your weight. Allow it to become heavy. And allow Mother Earth to meet you with equal and opposite support. The heavier you are, the more you release, the more opportunity to be held. And as you continue to breathe, I invite you to trace down the length of your spine to its base at the tailbone, where that first chakra is located. Your energetic foundation. And imagine that with every breath, you're growing roots. And your roots are burrowing through your seat, through the floor, through the surface of the earth. And they're burrowing deeper and more broadly into Mother Earth. So just watch your roots. Watch them dig down into Mother Earth, who is both stabilizing and receptive. And as you ground just a little bit more, again, just invite the weight of your body to release into the support of the earth. Inhale up the qualities of earth energy that you need in your space today. You may give it a color and watch it stream up your roots, maybe directing it to areas of your body that need grounding or need attention, need support. And again, take a deep breath in and out. I like to imagine that our roots in this circle are intertwined, and that through our roots, we can trade nutrients. We can provide each other with stability, that together in community and connection, we are each more resilient and able to withstand what comes. And so just feel that connection. Feel our support. And before we come back into our bodies and to our breath, I just wanted to set the intention that this conversation be for your highest good, that it be for my highest good, that it be for the highest good of all involved, and that what we take from this conversation can be used elsewhere in our lives to bless others. And I just wanted to invite April to, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that intention?
Oh, so beautiful. I really that connecting through the roots and with the earth and with all beings here, the presence of all beings on earth.
Thank you. All right, so come back to the oxygen, the air streaming into your nostrils and your lungs and back out. Come back to your beautiful body in your seat in the room that you're in. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Yay! We're here! So excited! All right, so we're gonna get started. And again, if you feel like coming on screen, it just makes me feel like it's a fun, it's a fun party. So I love to see faces. It's okay if you're doing other things or if you just need to be in your own space. That's absolutely okay. You may want to mute yourself, but you're always welcome to put something in the chat, and if you're willing to come into conversation as this conversation goes on, you're totally welcome to do that. So, April, I was so excited to know about you, and it was in the beginning of my exploration of moon cycles and dark goddesses and what happens when we get to the height of something, that this idea that there's value in letting things go and letting something that has blossomed go to seed. And so anyway, you came into my life thanks to our mutual friend, Kamla Sufi, and I saw that you had created this thing called the Moon is My Calendar, and I'm so excited that you are open to having this conversation today. Do you want to tell us, before we get started with the questions, is there anything that we need to know about you? Can you tell us just a little bit about who you are these days? Big question.
These days, I know, I feel like so much is shifting around that too, because a lot of my identity has been, what do I do? and that was a lot of the doing part of who am I is what I do, in that role in the outer world, in that role of identifying so much as a teacher at a particular school, and those kinds of the roles that are there that have just shifted and opened up to like not going into the boxes or not having to define that. So it's really in this period of shifting and opening up. And so I think there are some of those core, that sharing, I feel like that's really what does light me up, is that sharing and being in conversation and connecting with nature and what the wisdom of nature really has to how it speaks to each of us. And so there's been the journey of the doing and the roles of mother and all these things, but that opening to like, what is both the earth and the nature and cycles and the moon really like wanting us to slow down and listen to and hear. And I was thinking, Laura, of our first conversation in your front yard, and how lunar that moment was in so many ways. Was that January? I don't even, it was before like
BC.
Putting this date on the calendar way before we knew what was going to all transpire and unfold. And I just remember feeling so nurtured. And I think I'd come from doing like 2 other things and arrived not having eaten lunch. And you're like, here, oh, would you like to eat something? And you just put all this like fresh, amazing food in a bowl. And I was like, oh. And so really that connecting with the moon through this nurturing principle, and whether that's like nurture as mother or nurture as caregiver, there's a particular energy when you know you're feeling cared for and nurtured. And I think because in my role as mother, that's like a primary like activity, and where my energy goes to is nurturing my daughters, to be cared for in the way that you cared for me that day. It was like exactly what you said, of how can I sink even into more of that being held, allowing for that being held. And yeah, so I'm just appreciating that moment that we shared together, and watching the birds come to the bird feeder and our conversation, and just feeling held and nurtured. So yeah, I'm grateful for that, and grateful for this space to continue the conversation.
Yeah, that was a pretty spectacular moment, because I remember you brought up our conversation went so many different directions, and you suggested this title, The Wisdom of Waning, and it's like, oh God, that's it, and it continues to feel super important at a time where I feel like so much needs to and wants to and is trying to shift. So so now we're, a half an hour in, and I'm going to get to my first official question. So the first question is, I'm really curious about what you were like as a little girl. And I'm interested in knowing, what was your personality like? What were your interests? Yeah.
Coming back to nature, I feel like that was I believed in fairies. I went to a private school where we would draw fairies and have games where we'd be like, gnomes and giants. And it was a sort of Waldorf Montessori Sufism reoriented blend. And so that was this encouraged space for imagination. And the books, like the flower fairy books, those were very real for me. My mother planted flowers in the garden. That was sort of her role. So there was like sweet peas and geraniums and nasturtiums, and always growing. And then my father grew vegetables. So there was this connection with seasons at an early age, where I just sort of knew or was exposed to, it wasn't explicitly taught, of like, now is the time for this to bloom. Now is the time to plant this. And so also just, eating food from like a suburban rental home
Mm-hmm.
is like eating off the land still, but like a different, not growing up on a farm or like that, but just in this other context of having that growing. So as a kid, that was very just present in my life. And I grew up near a creek. And so there's a lot of time of just being kind of like lost in the creek,
Mm-hmm.
of getting that freedom to go on explorations in the creek and like, what are we going to
Mm-hmm.
find there? So that kind of that unknown place, and yet feeling that within this context of having like a safety in a neighborhood where it was safe to explore, to be in nature.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Because you're talking about, your connection to food and seasons. And I'm thinking, okay, my childhood was like Hamburger Helper, Tang, and Jello brand gelatin. And so that like my food wasn't necessarily grounded, it was in a box. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I am forever grateful for my parents in that way of, yeah. So, and as a kid, I think I was more introverted. I was more sort of quiet in the way of, I would often observe groups and kind of see how other people were acting or interacting.
Mm-hmm.
And be like the last person to raise my hand or answer a question. I remember as I got a little older in my early teens, being a part of a youth leadership volunteer program called Amigos, which is an international volunteer organization. And I remember them not considering me because there was this thing we had to do blindfolded and like communicate through just, I don't know what. It was a group challenge. And I sat there kind of listening, but not being as outgoing or extroverted and interacting. And I remember them telling me later, like I was younger too than the rest. They're like, they almost didn't consider me to kind of be a part of the program. But for whatever reason, someone took a chance, and then I went up to become a director and lead a program in Oaxaca, Mexico in my 20s. And so grateful for the chances that people took on me. And I feel so drawn to people who do have more of a quiet leadership, where maybe it's not as an extroverted expression. So I think I know that comes from that time of early childhood. That doesn't mean that I wasn't like wild in a lot of ways. I feel like there was a time of really following the call of more of the wild nature, which makes me think of the moon. And I know there was the questions of like that early connections with the moon, but I do remember I studied my undergrad at UC Santa Cruz. And I remember the full moon drumming circles. I don't know if every college had full moon drumming circles. And that being a very extroverted expression of the moon, of this more lunar nurturing energy. And yet within the moon and the whole moon cycle contains all of these different expressions. And so that was definitely a more young time of my life, and there was more of a connection with the full moon. Then in these drumming circles in the forest, I mean, among the fairy rings. So yes, there are these themes woven through my experience. But yeah, those are some of just those early memories. So that seasonal imprints, my father took me every year since I was 2 years old. He took me in the summers. He was a teacher, so he got the summers off. And he would take me and my sister up to a farm up in Northern California along the river. And so a similar thing of just being able to run free in nature, among things growing, and this keen observation for me. And this kind of comes even now that we're talking in this time of, for a lot of people, sheltering in place, of this unknown, of what we can learn when we observe something in nature, of whatever it may be. And so it could be the moon, and it could be something else that goes through these cycles of building and growth and release and composting, and death and decay, to observe something in nature. And so I got that chance growing up to be able to do that in many different ways, in different contexts. And I was just drawn to that. What are all the phases of the plant? What do they look like? Being able to identify seeds and know what plant they came from, and sort of by exposure and by encouragement, but no one really took me and taught me those things.
I always am so fascinated by those, like the threads that are woven throughout our lives that we can trace back, like, oh, that interest was always there, and it took different twists and turns. It resurfaced here. And so just that you had an appreciation for cycles, like, so I like flowers. I didn't care what the seeds look like, and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's very unique, even though it might feel completely so normal to you that it doesn't feel special. But it's so interesting now that here you have such a fascination, and it's you've given birth to something that is pulling people toward that interest and that body of knowledge. And so I just find that fascinating. So could you say, like, as you kind of entered into or nurtured this relationship that you had with the moon, that might have just begun with just kind of a noticing, what were some of the things that you started to learn?
That's a good question.
Or really, I don't even think about it as a head thing. I think of it as a body thing. Like, what did you take in from being in this relationship?
Past the full moon, more extroverted, like in my teens and 20s time, I think that started to shift and wasn't quite working anymore, to like stay up all night and just not really honor cycles of night and day. And that really took hold in early motherhood. And that's when my dear friend Sita Davis, who I hope you get to meet someday, we started meeting on the new moon. And we both had daughters around the same time. We were both directors with the organization Amigos de las Americas, and had this overlap. We were both Spanish teachers at the same time. And on the new moon, we would just start to meet, and it happened organically. We didn't make it like a circle, like invite people. It was sort of whoever maybe was around or visiting or passing through or just wanted to be there. And so we established that rhythm, and that was it's more than 10 years ago. And that sort of brought this other sanity that I needed to ground into. And I even before that had the question of like, why can't you see the new moon? I was so used to like, well, the moon, you can see the moon because the moon is full, that there's light. And so even just that question, that it started this other kind of inquiry. So another kind of a relationship with the moon, that was like, why can't you see the new moon? And why hasn't anyone, there weren't the kinds of, there's always been interest in the moon, and that's like in all of our blood and all of our bones, and all of our ancestors had a connection with this changing light in the sky, this time teller, keeper of that wisdom of cycles. And yet for me, it started entering into that mystery through the dark moon. And that was a time where I needed to learn how to both honor cycles because of having young um, uh, being a mother and being in a taking on, expanding into other roles and parts of myself that I needed to both take care of myself and take care of child and home and all of that. So this other knowing that started to come in of, oh, there are so many ways to be, and maybe that expression of the full moon energy is there at certain times, and maybe that expression of needing to come inward is there at certain times. And maybe myself or all of us, each of us, go through these cycles within ourselves of our own expression. And so that idea of having to decide whether, oh, am I more extroverted or more introverted, that no longer became the question of identifying in one particular way. It was more identifying with, how can I connect with that subtlety of my own energy to see when I am in a mode where my energy is more spiraling outward, and when I'm being in a mode where my energy is more spiraling inward. And how is it, how you started the conversation, Laura, of how we need to like fix ourselves, or how in the conversations in your work around nutrition and nourishment and food, how is it that the messages are, my energy needs to be outward. That's what's recognized and honored and valued and appreciated, and in all ways, in so many ways, that then the questions again became more, how is it that I can actually flow with notice first? So that noticing, that skill of noticing what's in nature, what's outside of myself, noticing my own nature, what's inside of myself, and how energy is flowing and moving and traveling in different ways at different times. And so how to tune into that and honor that and not push against that has become the last 10 years, really.
Well, this was a question that was further down, but it's really kind of up for me, so I'm going to put it up in the queue. I think what you are giving space for in your life is countercultural. And I think that in this culture that we're living in, that is so much about growth and expansion and extractive capitalism, where like we got to get the last drop at the cheapest price we can, we have to, when we're tired, we need to keep on pushing, and how much our value is attached to whether or not we're producing. And I think about how it wasn't too long ago, there was some kind of study done or experiment in Microsoft, like in Japan, Microsoft, where they shortened the work week. And it was either to like 4 days a week or, shorter hours or something. I don't remember the details at all. But the productivity went it improved so much, even though the hours at work were seriously reduced. And how we're taught to override the impulses and our cycles. And so I just wanted to kind of like bring into this conversation the title of our talk, which is The Wisdom of Waning. And just, can you bring the whole idea of the value of waning into this conversation, and how it really is like, it's kind of a radical thing.
Yeah, thank you I love the connection that you are making, as well as the bigger conversation. So the context of each of our lives, and then how our lives set up, and how are the systems that like squeeze every bit of that like that life force out of the earth and out of
there's got to be just a little bit more, just keep squeezing.
And I think there's those of us too that like pushing ourselves, that like get that kind of like, oh, I'm like pushing myself to I love producing things, making things. There's a lot of that earth element in me that wants to like bring things into form. And so I'm drawn to that and driven by that. And yet that more solar or yang expression, it's only half, and that didn't allow, and I think of times like when I started a home yoga practice, I'd budget a certain amount of time that I had in the morning before, like I had to make breakfast and do the whole marathon of the morning with kids. And then I was like, well, I don't have time for Shavasana. I'll just cut that out. That's like one of the ultimate, like, oh, no time for Shavasana. I'll just cut that out. And it's like, oh, wait, the actual whole point is Shavasana. The whole point is like, how can I actually sink into the earth? How can I get out my jitters? How can I move the energy in my body? How can I, do all of that, the asana, the yoga, the movement, so that I can actually be in a state where I can fully release and surrender. Mm-hmm. And I think to like skip that, and how many yoga classes, I don't know, it's very different by teacher of how that wisdom of the waning is honored within that context of like how the yoga world in the West. Mm-hmm. And so there's these different examples, and that's definitely one of them. It's like surrendering, releasing. Can you actually practice like as a corpse pose? Can you practice releasing your life? Like, can you practice actually going into that contemplation of death and surrender, and those things that within the waning time culturally too, the conversation around death that is like, oh, don't talk about that, or that's scary for kids, or that, or it's upsetting. And it is like, there's elements that are, and yet to not address that is to not go into that, the wisdom that's there in the waning, and the practices that we can do to be in relationship with that, and not just the relationship with the like bright and shiny. And there's I was at a wonderful conference last year in Mexico, in San Miguel, called Dreaming and Healing, and there was a lot of people who work in end-of-life care, dream work, end-of-life care. And one of the presenters, she put up these images of flowers. So on Facebook, there's a whole genre of themes of like flowers blooming, and it's this like bud opening in the flower, and then it cuts and goes to the next one. He calls it bloom cut, bloom cut. It's happy music, it's uplifting, and then there's a whole genre of flowers fading and dying, as if those two things aren't a part of the same thing, and the music is all sad. But there's this like bloom, and then, oh, we don't want to talk about what happens after bloom happens. So I know I'm meandering a little bit here, but I think the other piece and the other part of this waning is that time for reflection, renewal, like a rest time, and what it is then that can be integrated. And I really see it as this composting process, that I also have my father to thank. It's like, I know my dad loves me because he brings me bags of his compost. This actually happened last week.
That's love.
He wants to pay me back for something. He has a gardening business and sells like plant starts. And I'd help spread the word for him, and to pay me back, he brought me bags of compost. I'm like, true love from my father is he's bringing me dirt. And as a child, I just picked up and sensed, and he never said this, himself, but that the compost pile in our backyard was very much like the spiritual home. It's like where the things that were no longer edible or useful, or the flowers after the petals dropped went to the little bin and then put outside. And for him, it's nothing fancy. It's just like a pile of dirt. But he takes care of, and he loves that compost pile, and it makes his tomatoes like that much more, healthy, nutritious. So even as a kid, I remember our very first cat, our family cat, when the cat died, and I was really sad about it, I was very young, I remember my dad put the cat in the compost pile. And I was like, as for many years, it's like, the cat's in the
Stretch
compost
for me.
don't go near the compost pile. The cat's in the compost pile. I remember telling the other kids in the neighborhood, like, our cat's in the compost pile, you know. But I really now, in bringing it to this, whether it's a philosophical level or whether it's just like the practical level of like, death recycles itself, and healthy soil is made healthy because of that process of, of breaking down. And yeah, so what do we see on the grand scale of food is we see like injecting chemical fertilizer or sprays into like boosting up something where it's like, oh, that's how much we don't want to deal with the waning or the death or the composting.
Right.
It's like
So much.
fabricate it and like.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things that is coming to mind, going back to like extractive capitalism and this, you know, kind of a hyper focus on productivity, is that when we see things as linear, we learn to not value the ending of things, or we kind of demonize the ending of things. And so, like, you know, I am in a lot of conversations with my kids about how not every relationship is meant to last. And just because a friendship ends, we can see it as a whole and that it's complete rather than it's a failure, you know.
Wow.
And that it doesn't lose value just because it didn't last forever, you know. And so, you know, just kind of bringing that idea of cycles to our relationships too, you know, that they all have their life cycle, and to cling to the idea that we have to keep it alive when it's really like gone to seed, and it's we can use the dirt for something else, but we're like, no, you know, like, I don't want to fail. And so, like, to me, there's that's a wisdom, the wisdom in the waning, you know.
Yeah. How to, whether it's skillfully or not, but in that saying goodbye, or that kind of like, wow, this has run its course. Like this, the lifespan, like you said, of relationships has run its course for whatever reason. And I can see in this culture of like, you are winning or you fail, the whole fail like that.
Right. Forget what you've learned. If you didn't win, you suck and you should quit.
Yeah. Who is it? I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about this, but just the reframing of like failure being a revelation of like, oh, I failed, or like, oh, I had a revelation about something, like I've changed or you've changed, or the like thing that brought us together. That bond is whatever may no longer be there. So, and how to do that. So where are those kinds of skills taught? And that's almost like that putting on life support of like putting something on life support when there needs to be that going through the process of releasing. And that, yeah, I think right after we had talked, when you and I talked in person, this winter, my granny was in her active, like, end of her life, and it was coming to an end, and it was very clear that that was happening. And seeing also just how the medical established, like, what it is that, how we treat those times that are like, maybe there's something else we can do. And sometimes there is. And so it's important, you know, exploring that, but maybe there's something else we can do, is almost like death is going to happen. And she was lived such a full life to experience and to see how that is, how that transition was happening, and to be very present for that transition when we're not really given those chances to do that. And it's hard and it's emotional and it brings up every, you know, all the human stuff. That practice of endings. And that's part of the lunar cycle for me, is like every lunar cycle, when it comes to an end, there's just this practice of saying goodbye to that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I think for me, for whatever reason, I think it's that earth element in me that's like, make something, make a calendar, make some kind of a journal or a place to write or put this practice down on paper to keep track of, because I think there can be a kind of a forgetting too. So that we just becoming familiar with, oh, how can I practice those beginnings and those middles and also those ends. I wanted to share, Gabby just put that a question about just touching on that, how it is in this country, of how we think of death or don't think of it. There's a really wonderful quote that I wanted to share. And this is by Lila June.
I just discovered her.
She, like, everything that comes out of her mouth and her presence and everything. She's an indigenous environmental scientist, community organizer, and musician and artist from both Diné, Navajo, and European lineages, and she's in New Mexico. So something she had posted on Facebook says this: a linear society that thinks in terms of cradle to grave will have an end point. It won't be sustained. However, a culture that thinks cyclically and reinvests all waste into its livelihood will continue like a circle. It will never end. So I think we're seeing that on a
yeah. Well, I'm so glad, and I wanted to remind everybody that I will send up a follow-up email with any links, and so I'll get back with April to find that, get that quote and get it to you, and links to Lila June, who I'm so happy that you brought her up because I just discovered her. I was even thinking about the whole push in kind of functional medicine around anti-aging. And I, again, this resistance to something, and there's nothing wrong with taking care of your body, but that term is, again, it's just like, what's wrong with getting older? What's so wrong with that? I was talking to a girlfriend of mine because I've been coloring my hair for probably 10 years. And it's bugging me, just the whole, like, why am I doing this? And so it's surprising how many people I've just kind of tossed out the option, like, what do you think? And no one really thinks I should do it. And so, no one, I'm not talking about you fine people, because maybe I'd find agreement here. But I had a girlfriend who said that there was some study that when women let their hair grow gray, that they aged faster. And it bugs me, because what I believe is that it's what we attach to aging, the meaning attached to aging, that is the problem. Like, if I can't see aging as a way of growing into a new phase of vitality, like, I don't associate aging and lack of vitality, but I think there is, and that's where the problem is. Like, okay, if my hair grows gray, I'm basically about done here, So again, just like all the ways that we are pressured to like not value the cycles of our lives.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, you were talking about developing a practice, which is essentially, the moon is my calendar, is your way of gifting us with a way of coming into this relationship with cycles.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, let's see, I just wanted to read comments. Allowing my hair to go gray was the most liberating things I've ever done in my life. Thank you, Susan. And Jennifer says, I've always seen gray hair as wise. Yeah, wise.
And I'll say my granny who passed away this December at 95, her goal was 100, but the body was not in like agreement, cooperation, because she lived a very full life. She went gray at like mid-20s, gray, and then completely white. So her whole life was just like completely white. Oh, hi sweetie, I'll be in just a second. And she lived to 95 and traveled the world over and volunteered for every organization you can imagine, and lots of vitality, and so thankfully I had that role model of somebody who was, you know, completely white, like her from her 20s on. So Kyla said, oh my God, I'm calling in the gray because I hope my hair will look like Granny's and I can wear long silver braids. Yeah. I had an art history teacher, one of my first, that actually how I fell in love with art history and then studied that in my undergrad. And no one could tell how old she was. And she had this long gray hair and she looked so young. And it was this fascination of like, wait, you know, that kind of a contrast. But there was this like authority. I don't know. She just had this authority. And was it the gray hair? I don't know. She was super, super smart too. Yeah.
So going back to, yes, Kyla, a dignified energy of wisdom and sameness. Yes, like if we own our aging, then there's just, again, an embodiment of who we are at this stage in our lives. Yeah. So, so what I heard you suggest is that by coming into relationship with the moon, that we get these like it's like a mini practice maybe of becoming more friendly with the idea of waning and letting go. Would you say that that's true? I may have just put words in your mouth.
Yeah, well, there is the piece of honoring all the phases. And so it's both the practice of the self-study in relationship to cycles. And so seeing after the full moon, and I think this is part of the challenging part, is after the full moon, it's harder to find the moon, or it can be harder to find the moon. And so I think about before this practice and before really tuning in kind of day by day, and these are two of the foundational questions that I came up with just in this work, is where is the moon right now? And so seeing where is the moon in the moon cycle, and then where am I right now? What are the orbits that each of us goes through, and seeing where we are on those, whether it's our energy or our emotions or physically creative cycles, and then seeing if there's a link or connection between those two. And there may be a pattern, and there may not necessarily be a pattern, but there's a dynamic relationship.
So those questions I think are brilliant. So where is the moon right now? And where am I right now?
Yeah.
And even that I think of as more feminine energy. You know, it's not like you're answering, it's the value is really in the question. Yeah, the opening.
I think one other thing that I wanted to say, because I know our time is coming, and I have a little visitor here.
She's welcome.
Just a second.
Mom,
yeah.
I have no one to help me.
I will help you.
No one who's helping, and my hands hurt.
Okay, we've got some distance learning, learning things. So just as the conversation comes, you know, all the different things that bring us into relationship with waning. And that can be in some way working with the earth or working with compost. We just got worms at our house. So it's like the things that help to break things down and appreciating appreciating all the creatures in our world that help to do that. The flies and the vultures and I think the animals that often get demonized, right? Or like the not friendly ones that are the ones that are helping to break things down. And also just the cycle of both of menstruation, of bleeding, and how those messages about there's commercials for like tampons and pads and things that are like, just use this and you can just keep going and you can do handstands in your yoga class and like you don't even have to miss a beat because this product will help you just no leaks kind of thing. Like no one will see you're bleeding or no one will know because we won't talk about it because it's taboo and it's whatever these other things are, which is less and less. And yet there's that messaging again of here's this time for a pause, for rest, where you are releasing something in this process that is in many cultures given space for that time away from active engagement in the world. And I do think in this time of shelter in place, or just the shifts on a global scale where some of us are like actively not able to do out in the world, for some, not for all, and how that gives this pause for the time of like the time that maybe some of us wanted to take but weren't ever allowed to because of the pace of life, to not have permission for. So there's both on that side and with that waning as well in the transitions and the initiation in menopause. And someone who just asked me recently about the calendar, because I think it's often the moon is associated with menstruation and bleeding and that cycle. The questions about, well, can I still connect with the moon if I'm not bleeding anymore? And there's been a lot of people who've asked that question. And what I've seen and understand and have heard is like the moon then becomes something that's outside, but that is continuing the cycle and holding space and kind of anchoring that cyclical wisdom when the body is no longer going through the physiological so that the wisdom in menopause, which that's do you say hug me? Hug me.
Hey, what's your daughter's name?
Oh, this is Daphne Luna.
Hi, Daphne.
Hi.
It's nice to see you. I'm happy that you're here.
She was born on a full moon. So that timing of birthdays too, of like the moon that you're born under. And for those of you who are in the Know Your Moon, is like looking at that, what your moon is, the moon that you were, the phase that you were born under, which a lot of cultures also celebrate that and recognize not just a solar sun birthday, but what is your moon birthday? Yeah, with other non-Gregorian calendars.
So it seems like Daphne might be ready for our conversation to end a little bit. I'm not sure. And I'm so not done here. Like there's so much more to talk about. And I wanted to ask you, could you tell us, you mentioned something about Venus coming, entering the stage, and I don't know anything about Venus. And so that, and I want to know how people can continue to learn from you. And then we have a raffle.
Yeah. The fun stuff. So yeah, know your Venus.
Are you okay? Are you okay there timing wise?
Yeah.
Okay.
The cycles of Venus, that was kind of the next horizon or the next frontier. Venus goes retrograde tomorrow. And it's a process that Venus goes through every 18 months about. So it's this whole other cycle. And so it's something the last couple years that I've drawn my attention to, and seeing how Venus also has phases, and it's just over a longer period of time. Venus goes from being the evening star, which we have now, retrograde, coming out the other side and coming up as the morning star. So also another cultural timekeeper and time teller around the world. for many cultures.
Mm.
And so many connections with the planet, the mythology, and this other bigger arc of a cycle. And so I often learn things by teaching. That's how I started as a Spanish teacher. I was like, there's a lot that I don't know. And I think to motivate me to learn, I'm going to learn it because I'm going to share it.
Oh, that's me too. Yeah.
The Know Your Venus will start on the 22nd of this month. So
you have a class.
There's a class, yeah. So it'll be 6 weeks of looking both at the cycles of Venus, both the archetype and then the planets.
Oh, cool.
And
so I will, again, for everyone on the call, I'll link to that class. And are there any, aside from that class, do you have any other opportunities to learn from you? I think that this is, I feel like you're holding something that really people need to tap into too, you know, and especially because you're a teacher, I think that there's something really valuable about not only do you hold this wisdom and you've developed your own practices, but you also have the ability to break things down in a way that other people can take in and process themselves. So, yeah. And Gabby just said, April has the most wonderful classes. I'm not surprised. Thank you. So what else, how else can people work with you?
So there's coming up, Sita and I are going to have our second time through of a lunar cycle reset. So we had one in the spring. And so the lunar cycle is 29 and a half days. So it's 29 days of just little mini lessons or videos and meditations for connecting with some of the sort of the foundational practices and teachings that she and I have both developed, but really just lived kind of out of necessity of our own lives, not seeing it reflected back in the mainstream. And so, like you said, that kind of counterculture of how is it that we need to go against the grains that are of the messages about waning? No, there's no such thing. That's not allowed. Here's all these products to help in, you know. So that's going to start actually very soon. I just sent out, I have a newsletter, the Moon Letters, that I send out. So that's going to start on the 20th of May.
Okay.
And it's all on the website. So the moon is on the calendar, so we can send that out.
Okay.
And that's a fun, you know, it's 29 days and it is to help support and deepen a personal practice.
Nice. Okay.
And
because
then,
I feel like that's a good next step for those of us who don't, you know, who would like a little bit more information and some hand holding too, you know?
Yeah. And it is, so there's the calendar which sold out. So next year I'll be printing more.
I want to show you mine.
Yay.
It's so beautiful. Yeah. And so everyone is going to get a PDF about how to work with the moon calendar.
The digital version. And then, so that's, having the practices of setting intentions and mandalas. There's an ongoing, a moon mandala collective, which goes into a little more of the astrology and the creative practice of creating a mandala each cycle.
Each lunar cycle.
Each lunar cycle, yeah. And my intention really, because it's a longer span of time, there's less like direct back and forth interaction. It's more of working through the self-study and then coming back together around the new moon to touch base and to kind of establish that rhythm cycle after cycle, that reminder. Because for me, more than 10 years ago, you know, it was my friend Sita, she'd call me and she'd say like, oh, new moon's tomorrow, it's Wednesday. And I'd say like, really? It seemed like it would come out of nowhere. Either like no time had passed or it felt like, you know, years had passed in between. So having that reminder, I feel like had been really helpful in the beginning. So,
I think that in our, in Western culture, it's kind of like we don't do things much more than like set an annual intention or set our resolutions. And I think that's way too long, and so to me, to track by really like 2-week increments feels so much cozier to me, like it feels supportive as opposed to, I hope I make it, like who knows what's going to happen by December 31st.
Which is my birthday. I feel like that's this other connection into this work, is my birthday's on New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of pressure to set an intention, to be somewhere like amazing, have everything right, because the next day something new is going to happen, that you got to get it right. Like that pressure to get it right. I felt that as a kid, having this birthday on this like this day of the year that's so charged with that kind of energy.
Oh, yeah.
It's both charged with like this end, and then the next day starts something new, and it's like, right. How does that work? Is that?
Yeah. So I wanted to say that there were 103 people who registered for this call, which was so great. And I asked April if she would choose 2 numbers in that span. And those 2 people are going to, what is the raffle prize?
To get one of the New Moon Calendar journals from my...
Awesome. Okay, I just wanted to confirm.
Yes.
That's what I thought. And so let me see, they were, where did I write it down? It was, you gave me number 11, and Aline Zimmerman was the 11th person to register for the call. And then number 42, and that was Susan Merton. Do you know Susan Merton?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So I'll contact them later and let them know they got the moon calendars. So is there any, okay, I know you need to go. I don't want you to go. Is there any final questions or comments that people have for April? If we, I'm sorry, I was thinking we kind of had an hour and a half, and I was thinking that loud, but I didn't tell you that. So I was kind of pacing myself for that. Does anybody have a comment or
Laura?
a question? Yeah,
yes,
hi, Janine.
Laura. My first moon calendar was given to me by April's grandmother, Marnie, who we took Qigong together, Tai Chi, at the Adult Education Center. She took my yoga classes. She was such a big part of my life. I've been to her house. And after that, I would buy moon calendars for my daughters. Mm-hmm. And we would meet and go over the moon calendars with her friends. Mm-hmm. In April, since Audrey's passing, I have been reading her journals and her moon calendars. Mm-hmm. And, the setting intentions, the goddess energy. So I just want to know, you have been a part of my family, my daughter's lives, and I just feel so blessed to have met your grandmother and spend time with her. She's magical, and no one leaves this earth. Her energy, her beauty, her grace is with us always as Audrey's. They are people that we put in the compost pile, but then reuse to plant our gardens, and that beautiful energy is with us always. And so is your divine gift, as I probably have a stack of them from Audrey that I just read, and she lived by them. We all did. So I want to thank you for your gift.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. And Janine is talking about actually my other grandma who's in her 90s.
So it wasn't Marnie.
Yeah, this is my dad's grandma. My dad's mom. We moved back to Walnut Creek to be close to my grandmas, both of them in their 90s. And my granny Daff, who this Daphne is named after. And then Marnie, she's still practicing Tai Chi in her drive.
She is,
her
okay.
driveway.
I didn't hear, so
I know when I posted that my granny had passed, so many people know both of my grandmas, and they're both, very vibrant. And so this grandma, my grandma Marnie, she came over to my house one time. She's like, April, are you coming? And I was like, what do you mean? What? I didn't get the memo. She's like, we're going to the women's circle at Janine's. And I was like, okay. And she brought me to your house. And of course, my grandma is like, knows all the everything going on that's good in this world. She is tapped into and knows. And so coming to your space and coming in there and connecting, and I think connecting through the moon and too into Audrey's spirit and her energy, like having that support early on in this journey of creating the moon calendars and really seeing it brought to life through your practice and through her practice. And truly how it's almost like in leaving her body, her energy is so much stronger and present in this way where I continue to feel it and having that connection through the moon too. I feel like somehow can make a bridge between those worlds of between being a human here in this body and then the beyond, whatever happens next. There is this somehow this thread, this connection, this kind of a comfort in being visited and have that energy present. Yeah, anyone who finds my 6 years of moon calendar journals with all my intentions will get quite a view into the workings of my life.
Yeah. What a gift. I forgot that you two were connected, and to know that something that April connected or provided is providing a connection to you back into Audrey's energy and heart, is just really amazing. I'm so happy that you shared, Janine.
Yeah, well, I thank you. Thank you, Laura, and April, thank you. It's been a blessing to tap into that goddess energy, and the beautiful lunar cycle that brings us into power as goddess in both the waxing and waning of the moon.
Well, and it's also interesting that it was in a reading with Janine that the whole idea of the dark goddess came, and so she was the reason that I went to go hunting for this book, which kind of made me just dive into the whole idea of the moon and our undervaluing of the darkness. And it was this book that led me to you, April, so through Kamala. So anyway, full circle here. So is there any other comment or question before we let April and Daphne go? Thank you, Janine, so much for sharing. That was why we're here today, is for you to just to bring yourself here. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Natalie loves your fairy drawings.
Hi. This is coming back to the Mayher schools and White Pony in the early days and beginnings of fairies and rainbows and unicorns, of early childhood education, very real. I went to school with her daughter.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so please pronounce your friend's name, because I want to get it right.
Oh, Kyla, is it?
Kyla. Okay, Kyla. Yes, thank you, Kyla. So she asked, and this is a very good question, when will the Mandala Moon Collective open again? What's that?
Question. I know. So it's something that had started calendar year wise of starting in January. And it's something that has run as drawers are opening and closing.
That's all right.
That I opened in January, and so having like a cohort moving through, and there's been a lot of interest recently, so it just is a matter of structure and timing of opening up that space. I probably have close to maybe 25 mandala lessons that I've created over the years of having the moon mandala. Was a circle and collective. And so Kyla, maybe you can help. Kyla teaches amazing classes online as well,
Awesome.
on Teachable, I think, on that platform. So Kyla, maybe you can help me get it on Teachable and make it like super accessible.
Let's collaborate here.
Collaboration. I know it's more of a technical issue than anything. Yes, awesome. Okay, good.
Good.
Yeah, the cat compost. Gardening will never be the same.
Okay, so let's how about if we call this conversation, I feel like we need to bring it to a close just out of respect for your family's needs, and so I just want to kind of call everyone close. And I invite you to take a breath in and out. Another deep breath in and out. And I invite you just to hold your hands up. Just cup them as a symbol to yourself that you will take in anything and everything from this conversation that you needed, that resonates, that needs further fertilizer and composting. And so take that in. So this is our moment of Shavasana, right? Let it settle into your body, your psyche, and take a deep breath in and out. And then I invite you just to shake your hands out as a symbol that anything that doesn't belong to you, anything that you don't need, you're just shaking it away, okay? Not everything was for you. Some of the things were, okay, and that's okay. And so I just want to thank you all so much across space and time for connecting with everyone else who registered for the call, to gather close to April, to come close to her wisdom and her way of moving through this lifetime, which really is so impactful and in my estimation, really radical and healing as a path for women to come back into their bodies as opposed to trying to control them. And so I want to thank you, April, so much for who you are and what you brought today and the gifts that you still have to give. And I'll include whatever links and stuff like that so people can find you. And I think that everyone here on the call, if they're not registered for your emails, are going to want to be, so there'll be a link to that too. Is there anything else that you want to say before we close, April?
It's just been such a lovely space to be in with you, Laura, and with everybody who is here, and really so much of this is relationship, and our own personal relationship that connects us with ourself, with nature, with the cycles of life and the moon. So thank you for having me and hosting me and holding this space.
It's been a pleasure. So how about, in the spirit of cycles, let's say that this conversation has bloomed. It's reached its height, and that we'll let it go. We'll practice the grace of release, and we'll let it go to seed and compost and do its magic in the dark. And we'll see what grows next. So thank you everyone so much for this time. It's really just been so much fun.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Love you all.
You.